respected Chief Guest Dr. Ranjan Ghosh, Director Mr. Dilima, members of faculty, and my dear friends. A warm welcome to you all to this session of Raibanda Talks. This is a special session of Raibanda Talks, as in, this is the first session of this academic year of Raibanda Talks. Raibanda Talks has come a long way since 2005. The idea of Raibanda Talks was conceptualized in the year 2005 by our seniors. The whole need for Raibanda Talks was felt because they thought that real stalwarts from industry, experts from industry should come here, interact with us all and share their knowledge with us. It's only by interacting with people in industry that we also get a real life feel about what happens out there in the current scenario. From humble beginnings in 2005, we have come a long way. There are a lot of speakers who have come here, who have appreciated the interaction with students. This whole concept was appreciated by them, and a lot of topics ranging from different sectors, right from the software industry, entertainment industry, and FMCG sector were covered in this talks. Some of the top speakers who have come here and shared their views with us are Mr. Srinath Bhatni, Executive Director, Infosys Technology, Mr. Alan Durante, Executive Director, Mahindra & Mahindra, Mr. Shravan Shroff, MD Shringar Films. Now let me quote what Mr. Shravan Shroff has said. He says, "It was great interacting with young, inquisitive minds, and the variety of questions thrown been pleasurable experience for me. And maybe, this is the USP that this forum has to offer. A forum when speakers across industry can come, share their views here, and we can share with them our doubts, our questions about industry, about that particular topic that they have been covering. Today, we are proud to have with us Dr. Ranjan Ghosh, who is heading the Productions and Operations Management Division in IIM Calcutta. His credentials are, he is from IIT Kharagpur. He's done his MS from Stanford University, and then he's done his DSc from Columbia. I invite you, sir, to come and speak on that.
Director of the Institute, Mr. Dilima, faculty members, and students. So it's a pleasure to be here and speak to you on this particular topic. My interest in this topic has grown in recent years. I used to teach a course on materials management for many years. Well, we don't teach that course any longer. The title has been changed because over a period of time, the materials management, as you used to discuss that subject, has somewhat become irrelevant in the present context of liberalization and globalization. Although procurement and inventory control, all these have a role to play in supply chain management. You must have come across the term logistics management. This has been there for ages, in fact for thousands of years, as far as the armed forces are concerned. Supply chain management is a new avatar of logistics management. But if you ask anybody in defense, he can tell you the crucial role played by logistics. And the same concepts have now been extended to industry and business. There have been examples in defense of Napoleon at one time, and then subsequently Hitler trying to conquer Russia. And finally they failed on the logistics front. Napoleon succeeded to the extent of actually capturing Moscow, and he had occupied it for several months. But then the Red Army had learned this coast earth practice from the old Hannibal, and they just cut off the supply of food to Moscow. And the entire army of Napoleon perished. In fact, by the time he returned to France, there was nobody in the male population between the age of 16 and 45. That was the state of affairs. Hitler had not read this part of history, and he repeated this experiment. And of course, he couldn't even capture Moscow. In fact, in the famous Battle of Stalingrad, he lost 6 million people perished, Germans and Russians. And prior to that, in fact, in the 4th century BC, Alexander had conquered most of Central Asia, and he had come all the way to our Indian subcontinent. He started off with an army of about 700,000 people when he left Greece. By the time he had conquered a major part of Asia, he was left with only a few thousand soldiers. And he realized that he could not trade in these parts because, in fact, all his supplies were cut off. It's not only that most of his men had died, but he had no access to food or medicines, and he realized that it was impossible to control all these reasons. So he decided to go back. So logistics has always played a very major role in this field. And in fact, during the Second World War, that's when actually the scientific approach was adopted for the first time as far as logistics and supply chain management are concerned. In fact, before the landing at Normandy in France in 1944, the US and the European allies had conducted a lot of analysis on how to efficiently or most effectively move all the resources in terms of troops and equipment and other things to Europe from North America. And that was the first time that quantitative or operations research models were used. And of course, many of the quantitative techniques were developed during the Second World War, which gave an impetus to this field. But there was a journal which is published in the USA called Naval Research Logistics Quarterly. And it started right up to the Second World War. But if you look at all the papers published in that journal, you will find the emphasis is on inventory control and transportation. So that's what logistics was for many years. Now we have given it a new name, we call it supply chain management. And you will find that we don't restrict ourselves to just looking at the objectives of, let's say, minimizing the inventory carrying cost or transportation cost and so on. It goes much further. If you look at the context in which we are functioning today, you'll find that India today in the year 2006 is radically different from what it was prior to 1991. That's the year when the Indian government ushered in the new economic policy. Over a period of time, liberalization and globalization have been brought in. And we still have to go some distance as far as reforms are concerned. But it's definitely a sea change from what it was in the 70s and 80s. And as you are aware that India is one of the last countries to go in for liberalization and globalization. In fact, the Marxist groups, Chinese, were about the second last. They went in for this globalization in the year 1978-79. Korea had done it in the early 70s, Japanese had done it in the 60s. So ours was a closed economy in the 80s. And many of the concepts that I'll be talking about, supply chain management, would have been regarded not only as totally irrelevant, but if anybody was advocating these ideas in the 80s in India, he would have been even considered to be a madman, you see, because the whole economy operated in a different manner. It was what is known as the license permit quota large. For instance, we talk of demand management in the context of supply chain management. But in those days, demand was managed by the government, not by the market. government is to decide how much will be produced of what product or service. And therefore, many of the concepts just didn't make sense in those days. And it was an economy in which the business houses which could corner most of the licenses from the government for setting up new units would be the ones which would make the most profit. And if you look at the empirical data, you'd find that in fact that was the case. The business houses which got the licenses flourished, they grew at a very high rate, and the business houses which are unable because of course the question of ethics was important. So in fact, the organizations which are more ethical ended up with a lower growth rate because of these factors. And therefore, the success of any business enterprise in those days did not depend so much on how effectively you would manage your organization, but it was more in terms of cornering, let's say, certain inputs which are not available otherwise. Even commodities like steel and cement, which are in a glut today, were not available easily. You have to pay a premium for them. And so it was a question of how you tackle these three parameters of license, permit, quota, hours. Now, of course, with liberalization and globalization, what has happened is that you can import items from abroad. So there's hardly any product or service which is scarce these days. In fact, there is a glut for most products. And this is a global phenomenon. In most industries today, you have excess or surplus capacity. And therefore, you are operating in an economy where you have to compete with others. Because prior to 91, in fact, there's no competition. I returned from USA in the beginning of 75, and I wanted to buy a car or a two-wheeler, and I was told that you'd have to wait for 5 or 6 years to get a vehicle. I think the waiting line would be the time for a ambassador car was 5 years, for a premium permit it was 6 years, and for two-wheelers it was more like 2 or 3 years. And they told me that if you paid in foreign exchange, this time period would come down. Now, many of you were, of course, not born at that time, so you would not be able to imagine what the situation was. In fact, the first television that I purchased, I had to wait for several months to buy that. Today, you can walk into any showroom and just walk out with such products. But in those days, you could not because of the government's restrictive policy on issuing licenses or permits to companies to set up units or having access to raw materials. In fact, if you wanted to get a connection for cooking gas, I think now you can get it almost immediately, but in those days, it used to take many months. And I was at the time in Bangalore and we were conducting a program for Indian Oil Corporation. So those people were kind enough to give an out-of-turn license for this sort of thing. So that was the scenario earlier, and now the scenario has changed drastically. And you'll find that we are using the term supply chain management. There are many persons who would advocate that the term should be demand chain management rather than supply chain. The reason is in today's world, it's not only that you have to compete with others, you have to actually save the demand. That means you might have to create demand for products or services. Demand which was not there earlier. So it's not that we are only talking of supply side, we have to talk of demand. And you will find that this is one area where India might have made an entry somewhat late as far as creating demand in various sectors is concerned. But you'll find in case of airlines, you must have looked at all the advertisements that we have Apex Fare, Easy Fare, there are different names. But essentially, this is all policies garbed in different terminology to create additional demand. So it's not that you want to decrease your revenue. This is an important area of supply chain management where one tries to maximize the revenue, but not necessarily by selling everything at a throwaway price. So you'll find that in airlines, irrespective of what the advertisements say, as much as 70 or 80% of the tickets are sold at the full fare because the corporate sector is able or willing to pay that fare. And the remaining tickets which are sold at a lower fare are the ones are sold to passengers who would have actually traveled by railways because they couldn't have afforded it. So this is a classic example of how demand is actually created. And the first company to have done that was American Airlines in the early 80s. That was the first time when the airlines industry was deregulated. In fact, it's not only that India had restrictive policies, even in the rest of the world, in the airlines industry, till 1979, airline fares were regulated by the International Air Transport Association. And airlines had no discretion in deciding what the airfare should be. So the competition was based more on what type of services you provide. Now once it was deregulated, American Airlines was the first company to have actually gone in for a policy of multiple airfares, depending on when you buy the ticket and so on. And their revenue increased literally by many billions of dollars, and it increased their profit a lot. Later on, of course, these practices of dynamic pricing were adopted by other industries, other airlines, hotels, and so on. So you find that the environment in which we are operating today makes it possible to adopt such practices. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, if any airlines sold tickets at a price which was different from what IATA had dictated, it would have been regarded as illegal, and that airlines would have been punished by IATA. Now it is different. So with these opening remarks, I'll go through these slides. There are a large number of slides, so I'll skip over some of them. Actually, I use this as a sort of introductory session in many of the management development programs and also in the postgraduate program. So you may find some parts of the talk to be much more academic than what you would expect because the demanded talks is supposed to be lectures given by people from industry. But I'll try to make a combination of the two. And now there are various definitions of supply chain. Now you find that in a supply chain, the word chain is being used. Perhaps you can use the term network or web because it's not exactly a chain in the way it is defined in a dictionary. It is more like a network, both on the input side and on the output side. Now let me just show you a diagram. You will find that in a supply chain, you have manufacturing units somewhere in the middle. Now earlier there used to be a centralized manufacturing unit. Nowadays we have dispersed manufacturing. Till about 1950s, 70% of the automobiles in the world were produced just in Detroit, nowhere else. So it was very much centralized manufacturing. All the three big companies, automobile manufacturers of USA, had their factories at Detroit, and then they were exported all over the world. So that was the type of supply chain that was there in those days. That you have centralized manufacturing, and then it will be sold all over the world. Now you will find, of course, factories dispersed all over the world. It's not only that the Japanese have set up units as well, the American automobile manufacturers have also been compelled to set up units elsewhere in the world. And so you will find their presence, first they went to Europe, now you can see their presence in Asian countries also. You have dispersed manufacturing, that means components may be produced in one place, finished products in another. And of course, you have on the supply side, different tiers of suppliers. They're referred to as tier 1, tier 2. They go up to tier N. And then on the output side, you have distribution centers, wholesalers, retailers, and then you have customers. Now you find that when you talk about supply chain, it is specific to every industry. That's what the nature of the supply chain will be. For instance, if you look at the automobile sector, you will find that once an automobile is produced in a factory, it is dispatched to the authorized dealer. So there is no distribution center as such. It goes directly from factory to the dealer. The only exception is for Cadillac in USA, where they introduced the concept of having a distribution center run by General Motors itself. But if you look at any FMCG product, you will find that you have different layers of storage. You can call them distribution centers, wholesalers, stockists, and so on. So usually there will be 2 or 3 levels of intermediation. And whenever you have these intermediate points of storage, you will find that there is a cost of intermediation, because every level, every stage here will actually levy a charge. So there is a cost associated with that. And if you can eliminate some of these stages, naturally the costs come down. We will go into these details in later slides. On the input side, in fact, the reverse has happened. That means instead of the number of intermediate stages coming down, it has actually increased. The reason is that most manufacturers nowadays, they have become more and more of assemblers rather than manufacturers. So the value addition taking place has come down considerably over the years. And there was a time, for instance, in USA, when the material input cost used to be only of the order of 20%. Now it has reached almost 60%. The reason is that earlier, most organizations were buying raw materials and converting them into components or sub-assemblies. Now they are actually buying either the component or the sub-assembly. And therefore, the nature of the supply chain has changed. So the organization who puts its brand name on the product may actually they just buy various sub-assemblies and assembling the final product. But you will have various tiers of suppliers going back in the supply chain. And you will find that most industries had a high degree of vertical integration earlier. If you look at our steel industry today, whether it is Tisco or SAIL, you will find that they have their own iron ore mines. But over the years, what has happened is, if you look at any such industry, most of these companies have given up ownership of iron ore mines and coal mines and so on. Tisco still has ownership of some coal mines. In case of SAIL, it is only what ISCO had, Tasnava mines. But they actually buy coal from Coal India or from Australia. But this degree of vertical integration is decreasing. And this again, I'll go into more detail in later slides. And here, if you take the extreme case of vertical integration, there's the example of Ford. Now, Ford was judged as the most successful businessman in the 20th century. The reason is that he introduced this T-model Ford, and he brought down the price of the T-model Ford to less than 1/3 of what it was earlier. I think it was more like 1/4 of the price of similar cars sold by other companies, because of his very successful manufacturing and assembly techniques. He increased the wage level of his employees by a factor of more than 3. And this was an almost impossible feat, a miracle which he achieved. And he made enormous profits. And he first introduced this static assembly line and the moving assembly line. And this T-model Ford was very successful. In fact, it held a record for the maximum number of cars of any particular model which was sold. I think it was close to 20 million between the year 1913 and 1945. Later on, this record was broken by the Volkswagen Beetle, which sold 25 million cars. But one of the policies, the 2 policies adopted by Henry Ford to make this car very cheap and to have mass production. He had decided that every car will be identical. Even the color of the car will be the same. And there's no question of having anything different as far as other parts of the car are concerned. And there's a famous quotation attributed to him. When somebody asked him, why don't you offer this choice of a different color car? And he said that yes, a customer can have a car of any color so long as it is black. Now it turned out that if you had to produce a black car, the dye which he was using was the cheapest. So the cost will be less. So his entire emphasis was on cost minimization. And the other policy which he had adopted was that there will be 100% vertical integration. There was no concept of supplier as far as Henry Ford is concerned. If you require any input, he would set up a unit, a manufacturing unit for making that particular component or sub-assembly. So let's say the car you require tires and tubes. So he set up a plant for making tires and tubes. Now you need rubber to make tires and tubes. He bought rubber partitions in Brazil. you did, in those days, 80% of the car was in steel. So he put up steel plants, he bought iron ore mines, so he went back in the supply chain to the last stage. He had his own tractor trailers to carry his vehicles from Detroit to all parts of USA and the other parts of the world. He bought ships also to carry his cars. The only thing which he didn't have ownership of was the dealers. For some reason he decided that let dealers be there, he will sell the cars to these dealers. But everything else in the supply chain was owned by him. This was an extreme example of a highly integrated vertical integration. And this whole policy of having identical products finally backfired. By the 1930s, customers had decided that they want cars of different colors or different choices. And that led to a sharp downfall in the sale of these cars. And after the Second World War, in fact, General Motors became the leader. It was not Ford. But for many years, from 1910 to about 1940, Ford was the leader. But as you'll see from the results in the corporate sector, that this leadership advantages are all temporary. You'll find one company is the leader at one time, is taken over by some other company. Very soon, Toyota may take over, may overtake General Motors and so on. IBM used to be the leader in the 60s and 70s. I worked with IBM for some time, and in those days it was unthinkable that any company could pose any kind of challenge to IBM. Of course, in terms of gross turnover, it may still be the largest computer company because its turnover is more than $100 billion because it has both hardware and software. But it doesn't have the dominant position that it had earlier. So whether it is in terms of empires or kingdoms, like you had Greek Empire, Roman Empire, British Empire, you will find at different times these things change. And this happens in the corporate sector. And you will find that in today's context, the companies which have become the leaders in the world, where they have actually beaten other companies and become number one, in many of these cases, if not majority of the cases, the success can be attributed to effective management of supply chains. If you look at the company which has the highest maximum turnover, it may not be necessarily the company with the largest value addition, but in turnover, it has the highest turnover, it is Walmart. And it has a turnover of more than $300 billion, which is half the size of the Indian economy. But of course, one should not make this comparison because they are only a trading organization. They buy and sell products. And the entire success of Walmart is due to how they manage the supply chain. So earlier, Sears Roebuck was the leader. And when one makes comparison of various metrics, like inventory turnover or product availability on the shelves, then Walmart has a much superior performance compared to Sears Roebuck. And then there was another company, Kmart, which was also doing well. I mean, Kmart took over the leadership from Sears Roebuck in the 80s. Then by 90s, in fact, Walmart took over the leadership. And Sam Walton, of course, who created this empire, it was a classic case of rags to riches story. And by the time he expired, I mean, he had 5 sons and daughters. Now each one of them is worth $20 billion. This is not publicized, but if you look at the wealth of the Walton family, it adds up to $100 billion, which is much more than what Bill Gates or Warren Buffett has. So that's the phenomenal success of Walmart. If you look at Dell, Michael Dell, his company is Dell Computers. Now, he started his business when he was an undergraduate student at the University of Texas. So he started assembling computers in his, the room in his dormitory. And he didn't have any capital. So he introduced this concept of supply chain where he said that he will only assemble the product, he will not do any manufacturing. And it proved to be phenomenal, to be again a very major success. And for many years, in this list published by Forbes of young billionaires, that means people under the age of 40. This year he will not be in that list because he has crossed that age. He used to be the richest billionaire under the age of 40. And his was again a phenomenal success. and we'll go through later slides, that it had much to do with the type of supply chain we had. Because this is a company which had considerably lower inventory than what other companies had. But you will find in all these cases that the products that they are selling are no different from what their competitors are selling. And therefore, the entire paradigm has changed. And let me go quickly through the slides. Now, in the supply chain, you have these flows. You have information, you have product, you have funds. Now, as far as the discipline of supply chain is concerned, usually the emphasis is on the product flow and the funds flow. No, not the funds flow, but the information flow. The earlier avatar of logistics didn't really put much information, much emphasis on funds flow or information flow. But in today's context, you will find that information flow plays a very major role. And much of the information flow takes place in the backward direction. In other words, if you have a transaction taking place at the level of the retailer, the customer comes, he buys something, there's a transaction. This data actually flows back in the supply chain. So if you come and buy, let's say go to a retailer and buy a Lux soap, then this information should actually reach Hindustan Lever quickly. It will flow through various stages. This data has to be analyzed and aggregated, and the company has to make certain decisions. It has implications from the point of view of marketing, of finance, and so on. But you will find, in general, in most supply chains, whatever expenses are incurred in the supply chain from different entities, it is finally the customer who pays for it, and it goes back in the supply chain. So the effectiveness of the supply chain can be, again, assessed in different ways. If you use the metric of cash to cash, that means when are you spending the money and when finally you are realizing it. If you look at the entire cycle, that can be a measure of how successful that supply chain is. For instance, a lot of data has been collected for Coke and Pepsi. And in North America and Europe, where it's sold mainly in aluminum cans, it has been found out that this cycle is about 9 months, from the time that bauxite is mined till the time that an aluminum can is actually sold to a customer and he pays for it. But if you look at the processing time, converting bauxite into alumina, then aluminum, and the rolling and the blanking and forming processes, etc., and then the bottling, it won't add up to more than, let's say, a few days. Perhaps it can be measured in hours. But it takes 9 months. It means the cash flow takes place at a much later stage. If you look at main battle tank, we have a factory at Avadi, which actually makes this product, the final product of that factory. Now we have done a study for our Ordnance Factory Board, and it was a study on supply chain, and we found out that the cycle time is about 5 years. To start from the point when iron ore is mined, then there's the main product that goes into that main battle tank is actually steel. 80% of it is steel. Though that is more of a commodity, but actually the other sub-assemblies are more sophisticated, the electronic part of it and so on. And it goes to several steel plants, because it's a very special kind of metallurgical steel which is produced. And sometimes our steel plants are still not able to satisfy all the requirements, and we have to import the special metallurgical steel from Russia and Poland and so on. And of course, there are many other things that go into that product. But although it is a vehicle like trucks or cars, but the assembly process at Avadi itself takes 18 months, because they mainly take all the different forged plates and do the forging and so on. It's a very long process. And if you go back, like making the gun or the turret, which is produced in other factories, other ordnance factories, every stage you will find it several months. There is a lot of testing done in between. There are about 3 or 4 stages where testing is done. Let's say the gun is produced, it has to be fired, so it is taken to Chandipur in Orissa, and the inspection is done by people from the army headquarters in Delhi. So there are so many different agencies involved. So this is the type of problem that you come across in supply chain, that you have so many different entities and agencies involved in the manufacture of the final product. So, of course, in the case of a main battle tank, the government is financing it. So cash flow is not a major problem. But if you look at an they will be very much concerned of, as to how the cash flow takes place. That means you would like to compress this entire cycle. If you buy any medicine or soap or anything, you will find the manufacturing date is there. If you look at the date on which it was produced and the date on which you are buying that product, you can immediately gauge how successful that supply chain is, how long that period is. Ideally speaking, it should be brought to zero. But of course, there is this transaction or processing time. So you really cannot have zero lead time. That means immediately after it is produced, you cannot hand it over to a customer, though it has been achieved. Can you guess which company has achieved that? As soon as it is produced, it is handed over to a customer.
McDonald's?
Huh?
McDonald's?
Huh?
McDonald's?
Well, yes, I mean, if you talk of food products, you are right. I mean, McDonald's or Burger King, they do it, you see. They have very little inventory. McDonald's does have some inventory because it's a standard product, it's assembled. You know, it's like mass production, so they maintain some inventory. Burger King actually responds to requests from customer as to for how long it is to be cooked. And so in case of Burger King, actually, there is no inventory of the final product. They have inventory of raw materials. But it's a classic case of comparison between two companies which look very similar. But there are differences in the sense that in case of Burger King, it is made to order. In case of McDonald's, you don't have that choice. See, McDonald's has very strict prescription on how the cooking is to be done. For instance, if they are making French fries, you know what type of oil will be used, for how many seconds it will be fried, and at what temperature. So there is no flexibility, and this same process will be followed in all their outlets all over the world. India is different because here, since most people don't eat beef, the McDonald's products are different. But if you leave aside India, you'll find that McDonald's retail chains, though they may be franchised, they have to follow this prescription, and it is done in the same manner all over the world. And but yes, I mean, for the finished products, they may have inventory which does get used up in a matter of minutes. But the company which has actually zero inventory for the final product is Dell. Now I'll come to the details of that. There's no concept of a computer being made and actually kept there. As soon as it is made, it is shipped to the customer. So there may be some transit time because if you transport it, if it is assembled in their plant in Texas, and somebody in Chicago or New York is buying that product, it is dispatched by a third-party logistics service provider, so it takes some time. But apart from that, its lead time is virtually zero. But that has very significant implications as far as the success of the supply chain is concerned, in terms of how much cost you are incurring on inventory. And if it is a product with a very short product life cycle, then it is imperative that you store very little inventory of the final product. And this is why Dell scores over Hewlett-Packard or Compaq or IBM, now Lenovo. There are different definitions. Supply chain management deals with the management of materials, information, financial flows in a network consisting of suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and customers. Let me just go over this quickly. Different definitions. Key observations. Yes, there's one more prediction. Okay. Now, key observation: integrated activity among functions such as logistics, manufacturing, distribution, design, engineering, marketing, finance. Now, when you deal with supply chains, as far as its management and operations are concerned, you cannot really deal in watertight compartments of finance, marketing, production, etc. It has to be across functions. And you find that there are multiple organizations involved in a supply chain: suppliers, customers, third-party logistics providers. One always thinks of suppliers and customers, but in today's world again, there's an increasingly important role of what are known as third-party logistics providers. There are large companies like Federal Express, UPS. UPS is United Parcel Service. These two are American companies. There is DHL, which is a European company. They provide various types of services, not only transportation, but also warehousing, inventory control. They even manage the inventory of spare parts for many companies, and so on. And So you'll find that in the supply chain, there are other organizations providing these services. Earlier, one used to rent cars or trucks, and it was just limited to transport contracts. Now, of course, you have this third-party logistics service providers. You have coordination of conflicting goals or metrics. If you look at the measures of performance, then when you look at different entities in the supply chain, the conflict is very obvious. The simplest example I can cite is, let's say if you are buying a product from another company. Now it's like a zero-sum game where if the price is to be 100 rupees and you pay 1 rupee more, then you lose, the supplier gains, and if you pay 1 rupee less, he loses. Now this is the simplistic approach that was adopted earlier, that it's a zero-sum game. Now of course studies have shown that it is not so. In fact, even today, in case of government and public sector buying, you will find that they follow the procedures of bidding, where they will get quotations from different suppliers, and they will place the order on the supplier who has quoted the lowest price. Now, if you look at an individual transaction, then yes, this gives the best results. But if you are going to buy some material service over a period of time, then there is a lot of empirical data to support the contention that this doesn't give the best results in the long run. And Japanese industry has actually proved that, because they always go for very long-term relationships with suppliers. So this is where the conflicting goals comes in. And then there are, in the supply chain, you have multiple flows, as I mentioned earlier: information, the physical flows, and then there's financial flows, which can be actually in terms of payment of cash, or it can be on credit, but there is some sort of transaction involved there. Now, most analysis involves trade-offs across different entities. Now, these are the different forms in the supply chain, both on the supply side and the distribution side. And you'll find that there are trade-offs involved. For instance, if you want a higher level of service, then you might have to pay a higher cost. For instance, if you are planning to buy a television or a refrigerator, these are durable goods. Now, if you go to the showroom of one of these companies, now if you want to get the delivery then and there, it is quite likely that he will have to maintain a lot of inventory in his showroom, which is in the heart of the city, and he might have to pay a lot of rental for that, for providing such services. On the other hand, if he has a warehouse which is on the outskirts of the city, where he has inventory of his products, he will dispatch this product to your home after a few hours, but he incurs less cost. So you will find that there's a direct relationship between cost and service, and it depends on the the customer. For instance, some customers may be very particular that he is not willing to wait, but he's willing to pay a higher price. So, especially with people becoming more affluent these days, their level of expectations have gone up in terms of these services. There is also the aspect of after-sales service in case of machinery and equipment. But you'll find in case of food products, for instance, you'll find that in restaurants they have both buffet and a la carte service. So it depends on what the customer wants. If he doesn't want to wait, he'll go for buffet. But if he's more concerned about the type of item he wants to have, the dish, then he'll have to wait and get that a la carte dish. And here the culture varies across countries. For instance, studies have shown a very standard fruit like watermelon. Japanese will have it fresh. They will not like a watermelon to be kept in a cold storage and sold to them after a week. It has to be sold within a matter of a day or so after it is plucked from the plant. And they're willing to pay a very high price for that. So watermelon will sell in Japan for $4 or so because it is fresh. On the other hand, in USA you may get the same thing for 50 cents because it has been kept in a refrigerated state for a long time. And this applies to many meat or fish products. In Japan, they eat a lot of fish, but the rule is that after the netting is done in the morning, the fish has to be sold by the evening. There is no concept of eating it in deep freeze like in North America. So the prices of these food products go up. So there is a direct trade-off in terms of cost and service. You will find, like when we send some mail by courier service or speed post, we pay a higher price to bring down the cost. So this sort of trade-off is very much there in any supply chain, and the usual metrics or measures are cost, service, time, and risk. Now, risk plays a very important role in supply chain. I'll come to that later. Because whenever you have different entities, there's a very important question that comes up. Who is going to bear the risk of any failure? Now, here I'm not talking of major failure, but let's say if the actual demand of the product turns out to be less than forecasted, then what happens? Take the case of a newspaper kiosk. Now, if newspapers are delivered to people's homes, then one knows what the demand is and the revenue is realized. But if in the kiosk, the newspaper boy gives 100 newspapers and the actual number is sold in 80, then what happens to the remaining 20 papers? Now, those of you who have studied operations research must have come across this newspaper boy model. It's described in all books on textbooks on operations research, and it will give you the solution. That means if you know the probability distribution of the demand, and if you are told what the salvage value of that newspaper is, and salvage value will be found out by it will be different on the policy. The newspaper publisher takes it back and pays the price. That is the salvage value. But if he doesn't take it back, then it has to be sold by the kg and the scrap value is almost zero. So that's the salvage value. Now, in this case, if the policy is that newspaper publisher will not take back the newspaper, then this kiosk owner bears the risk. But on the other hand, if the newspaper owner takes back everything and he pays the entire money which he had taken, then the risk is borne entirely by the newspaper owner. But you can have a higher media somewhere in between, where the newspaper owner actually pays back part of it. So if he has sold a newspaper for 1 rupee 50 paisa, he may agree to pay back 1 rupee, so that the kiosk operator loses 50 paisa, not the entire 1 rupee 50 paisa. Now models have been evolved only in the last 10 years, which shows that many of the models described in the operations research textbooks were faulty in making that assumption that you have no role to play in deciding on this particular price. But if one can negotiate this particular price, it gives better results. And if you look at the combined profit of the newspaper publisher and the newspaper boy, then it turns out that there are mathematical models which will tell you the optimum price at which these newspapers will be taken back by the publisher. It's neither the full price nor zero, it is somewhere in between, depending on the nature of the demand and so on. This is true for many such products where you find that such policies have to be adopted to actually share the risks. So in any supply chain, this is a central question as to how you are going to share the risk and the rewards. And you find each interface in the supply chain represents movement of goods, information flow, transfer of title. Because you'll find ownership changes. For instance, you see a raw material gets converted into components, sub-assembly and so on, but at every stage it goes to different entities which have their own legal status. So if organization X transfers something to organization Y, there is a transfer of title. So there is a purchase and a sales transaction taking place. And this is the difficult part in the supply chain, that you are dealing with a large number of entities which have their own legal status. They are independent companies. They have their own authority or autonomy or authority to take decisions. So how do you get the best results? Because you cannot dictate terms to the other. But yes, you can enter into contracts which will give you optimum results. Now there are some quotes. In the end, all business comes down to supply chain versus supply chain. Earlier, competition used to be based on prices, on brand names, and so on. So you'll find that brand used to play a major role. It still does. But you'll find that in case of any products, we'll go into the details later, that as far as the nature of the product is concerned, it has come down. The variation is not that much. In fact, high technology products end up becoming commodities. When they are first introduced into the market, maybe those products can be differentiated as something superior. For instance, Hewlett Packard, when they first introduced this desk jet printers, they were definitely superior to the Docmetrics or impact printers. Now you will find other companies are also making the same product, and And they have become commodities in the sense that specifications are the same. There's hardly anything to differentiate among these products. So differentiation now is playing a less major role than what it used to. So it really depends on the performance of the supply chain. And you'll find, in case of computers also, you'll find that there's a famous quotation which Intel is now going to change. Intel Insight. Now what does it tell you? This advertisement is actually carried out by different computer manufacturers, because this is what Intel strengths are going to do. I think there are two messages one gets. One is that yes, the microprocessor Insight is manufactured by Intel, but apart from that, perhaps gives the message that it's a reliable and good quality product. This is being made by a very reputed manufacturer. Now for this notebook and laptop computers or PCs, Intel has about 65 or 70% of the global market. And therefore, when you buy such products, in most cases you will find there's an Intel microprocessor, which is the most important component in a computer. And then in terms of the operating system or software, you have the Windows operating system in majority of cases. In some you may have Linux. So you will find that most of these computers are not very much different from each other. So although it's a high technology product, but it is becoming a sort of commodity product in the sense that it is almost like buying steel or cement, where you don't really make a difference whether you buy steel from cement from ACC or L&T or Lafarge. It's almost the same. And in case of steel also, you do the same thing. You don't look at whether it is go or sale. So in case of computers, it is becoming that way. But still, people may prefer certain computers. Now in USA, for instance, they prefer Dell computers. The reason is that it is priced lower. Nobody says it's a superior product. They are saying that you can select your own configuration, you can decide how it will be assembled, and you pay a somewhat lower price. But it's not that it is regarded as a product superior to that made by HP or Compaq and so on. So you will find that it's becoming more and more a case of supply chains competing with each other. For instance, what Walmart sells or what Kmart sells, there is no difference. They are sourcing from the same suppliers. Sears Walmart may be actually targeting a different segment of the market, the upper segment, the premium segment. But there's hardly any difference between Kmart and Walmart. So it really boils down to how effective their supply chain is. Now, the other quotation is that it's taken from an article which was published in Sworn Manufacturing Group. Japanese manufacturing industry owes its competitive advantage and strength to its subcontracting structure. Now, earlier there was a feeling that Japanese are using advanced manufacturing technology, particularly robots and so on in the automobile industry. But their own Ministry of International Trade and Industry had told the American professors who were doing the research that it is more to do with the subcontracting structure, where many of these large companies, manufacturers of automobiles or consumer electronic products, like let's say take Toyota, Sony, they have these long-term relationships with their suppliers, and they get very attractive terms. In fact, in spite of inflation, most of these suppliers have agreed to bring down the prices of the components they supply every year. They agree to 2% or 3% reduction in the price. But we all know that every year there is inflation taking place. So prices should go up, but actually in most of their agreements the prices go down, because the supplier makes these processes more efficient. He does research, he goes for innovative practices, to the introduction of new products and processes. He's actually able to lower the prices, and this gives, so there's many of these Japanese companies are able to source many of their inputs at a lower price than what it would have been, the cost at which they would have manufactured in-house. In fact, in this article, a comparison was made of certain components and sub-assemblies which are made by General Motors in their own plant at Detroit, and what the price that Toyota was paying to source from other suppliers. And they found out that for a mid-sized car, the difference was almost $1,000 in terms of how much Toyota was saving. And Toyota was also saving in terms of lower inventory carrying cost and so on. And that is what gave this advantage. The third one is actually a sort of restatement of the second part. The manufacturing now competes less on product and quality, speed to market. Now, notable quotes. Yossi Sufi is one of the leaders in the field of supply chain management. He's at MIT. So he says that making stuff that is easy. Supply chain now that is really hard. With today's technology, it is difficult to keep intellectual property secret. Thus, easy to reverse engineer any product and make stuff in a matter of days. Now, Apple came up with this product, iPod. Already, there are other companies making a similar product. I think they have reversed engineered because Apple spent a lot of money on doing research for this product. Similarly, when Sony and Philips brought Walkman into the market, these are the two companies who did a lot of research. But then other companies also introduced this product into the market. So you find in today's world, most companies are able to access or assimilate the technology which is required and come up with new products. So if you come up with a new product, you get a temporary advantage in the sense that you are the first in the field. But it is not going to make you the leader for all time to come. And that is where supply chain comes in. So it says that because it makes up in a matter of days. However, building a process that delivers stuff across the globe, involving dozens of suppliers, distributors, port operators, custom brokers, forwarders, and carriers in a highly chain operating in concert, is not only difficult, it is very hard to duplicate. The bottom line is that in a flat world, the smart and fast global supply chain is becoming one of the most important ways for a company to distinguish itself from its competitors. Now, most retail chain outlets know that Walmart has been very successful, but they have not been able to replicate Walmart. So this is one area where, in fact, they found out that replicating a supply chain is more difficult than making a high-tech product. That's how it has turned out to be. Now, Thomas Friedman, he has published a book last year. It's called The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century. And he's a great admirer of Bangalore and Silicon Valley. There's an entire chapter devoted in this book on Bangalore and Infosys. And he got the Pulitzer Prize for this book. And he says that supply chain management is one of the 10 flatness of the world. To appreciate how important supply chaining has become as a source of competitive advantage and profit in a flat world, think about this one fact. Walmart today is the biggest retail company in the world and it doesn't make a single thing. All it makes is a hyper-efficient supply chain. Now, once he had delivered a lecture at Dell company, so he said he will not take any consultancy fees for that, but he wanted Dell to do a study and tell him how many suppliers they have and in how many countries they are located. And he got a reply. I think there were about 100 suppliers located in 47 different countries for the computers that Dell was making. So one of the things that Thomas Friedman has mentioned in his book, that one of the unifying forces in the world today, no matter how much political difference you have, will be the supply chain. That means, if let's say Dell buys a component from a country which is actually hostile to the United States, you'll still have that business relationship. And this is borne out by empirical data. For instance, India has been very successful in the export of gems and jewelry. Most of the gold and diamond is actually imported. As you know, that South Africa is the largest producer of diamonds. So much of the diamond jewelry that is produced in Surat, actually the final ones are made in Amsterdam, but in terms of volume, it is Surat which wins. Now, in the days of apartheid, when the United Nations had imposed an embargo on South Africa, and this embargo was lifted only in 1992. So from 60s, for about 30 years, this embargo was there. India had taken the stand that it will go strictly by this UN embargo. They will not import anything from South Africa. And yet, all this diamond and much of the gold that was being processed at Surat was coming from South Africa. Now, how do you think it was possible? See, DBS is the largest company here. It exports a lot of diamond and gold. India was able to meet its part of its requirement from then Soviet Union, but not the entire. Major input was from South Africa. See, there were actually companies in the United States which are buying this gold and diamond from DBS company. These are American companies, and India was importing from them. So officially, India was buying these inputs from other countries, nothing to do with South Africa. Though these metals might have been mined in South Africa. So that's how the problem was solved. And in fact, in the till about the 80s, when USA finally went for a formal diplomatic relationship with China, USA actually used to have a lot of trade with China, running into billions of dollars. Now, how do you think it happened? I mean, officially they could not acknowledge that this trade was going on. Actually, what was happening was that most of these transactions were taking place through Hong Kong, which was a British colony in those days. And in fact, Chinese were never in a hurry to take over Hong Kong. They could have done it militarily, but they honored the agreement with Great Britain that okay, UK will hand over this Hong Kong on a certain date. And the reason was that much of the exports from China was taking place to Hong Kong. So it was in their own economic interest to let things continue like that. And even now, a lot of exports take place through the Shenzhen corridor through Hong Kong. And the philosophy of SCM, the entire supply chain is a single integrated entity. So though you have multiple entities, each with its own legal status, but the supply chain has to function as a single entity. And the cost, quality, and delivery requirements of the customer are objectives shared by every company in the scale. Now, if these objectives are not shared, then every entity will suffer. Take the case of automobiles. Let's say you have a Maruti or an Indica car. There are dealers who are selling these cars. Now, you find that when a customer goes to this dealer, the perception or impression that he has about the car will have much to do with the type of service he gets from this dealer. So whatever the manufacturer might have done, the good work can actually be, negated by what the dealer does. And therefore, you find that in the supply chain, when you have, let's say, retailer always has a major role insofar as selling the product is concerned, because it's not only the workmanship of that product, it's also what type of treatment the customer gets, both at the time when the transaction is taking place and in case of equipment, after sales and so on. So you find most of the automobile manufacturers, they spend a lot of effort, time and effort on monitoring the performance of these automobile dealers, not only at the time of sales but also after sales. So that's part of the supply chain performance. Inventory is the last resort for resolving supply and demand imbalances. Now, in earlier times, particularly in India, where suppliers are not reliable, the resort that most materials managers, in fact, they are compelled to use such measures. They were using inventory to solve all the problems. And we have done some studies on materials management for many public sector units. And the typical reply that we got from materials managers was that when you have suppliers who are not reliable with respect to delivery schedule, the only way to solve that problem is to have a high level of inventory. And it's astonishing as to the levels of inventory that we have in our country. We did a study for this ordnance factory board. There are 39 production units in the country. And in fact, when we, the terms of reference that we got, the main clause that was there, looked to be, we thought that it was perhaps unfair to them. They said that you should be able to reduce the inventory level to 4 months requirement. Now, if you go by international norms, 4 months is very much on the high side. In today's world, it is more like 1 month or 2 months. Now, prior to that, it was 6 months, and it had to be brought down to 4 months. And we were lucky in another respect that at that time, Kargil war took place. And much of the inventory that they had of raw material, work in process, that is the products which are flowing from one factory to another, their production went up, and automatically this inventory came down. But we felt that they are still, let's say, 20 years behind what is happening in other parts of the world. Because in North America, trade would be more like, let's say, 1 month or 2 months worth of inventory, depending on which industry it is. In Japan, it may be measured in weeks rather than months. So what happens is that when you have a lot of uncertainty, which was the case earlier, uncertainty with respect to the performance of the supplier, with respect to the transportation system. Earlier it used to take the railways approximately a month for shipping a consignment from, let's say, Kolkata to Mumbai, which should actually be a matter of 3 or 4 days, but it used to take 3 or 4 weeks. So in such a framework, most people would resort to such measures. But the difficulty with this measure, it worked very well till 91. But after 91, when globalization took place, and you have to compete with the rest of the world, then such decisions can be counterproductive in the sense that you will lose your competitiveness in today's world. And Friedman has used that word flat world. I mean, he's referring to something like a level playing field. So the whole world is like one level playing field where everybody is competing. So you can't, adopt some policies. Now earlier, the efficiency, most firms used to try for cost minimization policy so that you can sell the product at a lower price. And competitiveness was measured by the price factor. But now things have changed. You will find that cost plays a less important role because most people, the customers, have become more affluent. And so the earlier paradigm of lower price, better demand, that doesn't work anymore. That was in the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s and 90s, firms have started adopting various techniques to make themselves more efficient. These are acronyms: just-in-time system, total quality management, total productive maintenance, and so on. And then after 2000, you'll find this era of achieving excellence at the value chain level, not at the firm level, but at the supply chain level. So supply chain management, customer relationship management, e-commerce, etc. So this is how evolution of SCM has taken place over the years. So as I was mentioning earlier, that previously we had courses on materials management and logistics management. Now it has become supply chain management. So instead of looking at various entities on both the inbound and outbound logistics side, now you have to look at the entire supply chain. Now what is new in SCM? Global competition. Now for many countries, particularly India, this is a very major factor that you have to compete globally. Now as per the stipulation of World Trade Organization, you cannot charge very high customs duty. It has come down over the years. At one time, for many products, the import duty was more than 200%. Now it has come down to 20%, and in the next 1 or 2 years, as per WTO stipulations, it will come down to 10%. Quota or non-tariff barriers like quantitative restrictions have been removed on most products. Earlier there used to be a quota on export of textile products from Asian countries to Europe and North America. Now from last year that has been done already. So one type of negative force has been eliminated because of WTO. But now if you look at textiles, for instance, India is a major exporter of textiles and garments, and this quantitative restrictions have been removed by Western countries. But actually India is facing more competition now than what they were facing earlier. What is the reason?
From China.
It's from China. You see, earlier China was not very much interested in export of textiles and garments. I remember when I was a student in USA, most of this textiles used to be imported from the East Asian countries other than China. Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong and so on. Japan also, to some extent, this subcontinent. Then after, in the 80s and 90s, the export from the Indian subcontinent increased. All these countries, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so on. But now China has entered the market in a big way. So in this world, you will find that competition is coming from all quarters. It's not only from firms from within the country, but from outside. So there's global competition, there's shorter product life cycle. This is one of the very major problems in supply chain, that product life cycles are becoming very short. And that poses very serious problems as far as managing or operating the cycle of the supply chain is concerned. And the companies which can cope with this product life cycle, and you have to come up with some operating policies like what Dell has done. You see, Dell doesn't pay for any obsolescence because there is no finished product. Most computer manufacturers lose out because they have this inventory of finished products. And whenever a new product comes into the market, this finished product inventory has to be sold at a throwaway price. So there's a very high cost of obsolescence. It happens in the garment industry also. There are certain types of garments which has low product life cycle. So, if you have too much inventory of finished goods, then you have this problem. There are new low-cost distribution channels. That means there are channels where the product may be shipped directly to a customer, like what Amazon.com does. And this is being adopted in many industries. With e-commerce also, you'll find that there are low-cost distribution channels. You'll find that nowadays you can bypass a travel agent. You can book your air ticket on the internet. There's a website, MakeMyTrip.com. Now, you can either buy from the airline's website or from this other website which provides you assistance. So all these distribution channels are coming into being, and they're not there earlier. More powerful, well-informed customers. Now, what has happened thanks to the internet is that customers today are much better informed than what they were earlier. Then you have the internet and e-business strategies. Why is SCM important? Strategic advantage can drive strategy. Manufacturing is becoming more efficient. SCM offers opportunity for differentiation. That is there, where you have built-to-order computers or cost reduction. Walmart, a big bazaar that is in India. Globalization across the world requires greater coordination of production and distribution. Then you have increased risk of supply chain interruption, increases need for robust and flexible supply chains. Then at the company level, supply chain management impacts cost for many products. 20 to 40% of total product costs are controllable logistics costs. In the oil sector, the costs are almost 40%. If you look at what we are paying for petrol and diesel, the biggest component is of course taxes and duties. It is about 50% for petrol. The next, biggest component is actually the logistics cost in terms of transportation of the crude oil, the finished product, and so on. The service for many products, performance factors such as inventory availability and speed of delivery are critical to customer satisfaction. Now, examples of supply chain, these are just to make comparisons. For instance, you have Dell being more successful than Compaq or IBM, Walmart, Kmart, CS Roebuck. Walmart has been much more successful than CS Roebuck and Kmart. In fact, Peter Drucker, who was the consultant for CS Roebuck, he had made a statement 10 years ago that this logistics and supply chain management is the last dark frontier of management. Africa was referred to as the last dark continent. And he said this is one area where many problems have still been unsolved. And then later on it was realized, we'll go through some of them, that some of the problems were still facing solution. I mean, they were at the stage where empirical observations have been made, but people had not really found solutions. Now there are success stories. You'll find this cooperative system of actually procuring milk and selling them. The entire thing that Burgess Indian has done and the NDTV, that has actually made India the #1 producer of milk. It used to be, it was not in the first 10, 30 years ago. And customer has gained by getting milk at a lower price. It is really due to the very efficient supply chain that NDTV has evolved. Now, merry-go-round system at NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation, has the super thermal power plants. And most of them use coal as the fuel. Now, you have to move millions of tons of coal from the coal pit heads to these thermal power plants. And here you have to bring down the logistics cost. So the way they have done it is that they have actually put up an infrastructure, railway line from coal pit heads to this thermal power plant. And they have invested in a special type of rolling stocks. Wagons which have hydraulic discharge systems, so the bottom opens up. So when they go to the thermal power plant, they are there on top of a conveyor belt, and the bottom opens, and the entire 60 rakes unload their coal in about 1 minute. Earlier it used to take 20 hours because they used to do it through tipplers. The wagon had to be tilted through so many degrees, and it used to take many hours. Now that has been reduced to 1 minute, and in fact, this train system, merry-go-round system, is operated by NTPC itself, not the railways. So the railways had executed the project. So in all their major thermal power plants, Singrauli, Korba, Rajmahal, they have this merry-go-round system. So that has brought down the transportation cost and also the inventory carrying cost and so on. The Dabba Wallas of Mumbai. Now, several years ago, There was an article in the Forbes magazine that Dabawalas have achieved 6 Sigma level of quality management. Now, why did they use the term 6 Sigma? So they have approximately 2 to 3 lakhs of these different careers being delivered every day. And they have about 7,000 persons doing it. And they only use a chalk mark. They have their own coding system, which is very simple actually. The address of the consignee is simple. And the error rate is about once in 3 days. For one dabba it will happen. So it is about 1 in a million, so to say. So they have achieved this 6 Sigma level. So it is this Forbes magazine article. And then, when Prince Philip had come here, he had visited them. So that, gave them a lot of publicity. And then the governor of Maharashtra invited these two persons, the president and the secretary of the Dabawalas, to the Raj Bhavan. So since then they have become famous. But I've heard their presentation. Now they have come up with a CD. And you can see the video is very interesting, the way they do it. And this cooperative has been there for more than 100 years now. I didn't know that. So it's not a recent thing. But they have come, they have got into the limelight only recently. Gems and jewelry industry, I was telling you that although we don't produce much of gold and diamond, we are very successful. It's because of the supply chain. You will find the Reliance industry, if you look at the Jamnagar refinery, it has, of course, it was set up much later. So it had a more efficient supply chain than Indian Oil Corporation, APCL, BPCL. You see, IOC has refineries, let's say, in the northeast. And now Assam doesn't produce oil. So they have to actually import oil from the Middle East, then they have to be pumped in through pipelines from Haldia all the way to Assam. So the cost of the logistics cost is much higher in case of these refineries. Luckily for HPCL, BPCL, these are actually private companies earlier, Caltex and Shell. Now they have refineries on the coast, at least in Mumbai or Vizag. So the logistics cost is not that high. But in case of Reliance Petroleum, it's the lowest because it's a Jamnagar, and most of their crude oil is imported from abroad, and 50% of their output will be exported. And then they have a single boil loading system. So the crude oil is pumped directly from the ship to the refinery. Then you have POSCO, Tisco. Now POSCO has come into the news recently. It's a Korean steel maker, about the 4th largest in the world. There are 2 steel plants, each with a capacity of 12 million tons. But what is amazing about POSCO is that they have no raw material in Korea other than limestone. They import iron ore from Brazil and India, coking coal from Australia, and still they are able to produce coal, steel at competitive prices, the same price that Central Asian republics and India does, in spite of all that logistics cost. It has partly to do with their technology. Their energy consumption is very low, so the cost of production is less. Although their wage levels are much higher than in India, but labor cost is in fact slightly less than in India, because for their 12 million ton steel plant, they have a workforce of only 7,000. In our steel plants, if you have a 4 million ton steel plant, we have 20,000 employees. So POSCO has been very effective. For many years, they were actually supplying to all our automobile manufacturers, old road sheets. Now, the road will not be the same, they're still supplying for some of the bigger cars. But they are world leaders like Nippon Steel, now there's Arsenal. Then you have this example of Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. Now, Barnes & Noble has showcases in the big bookstores. Amazon.com sells on the internet. But Amazon.com has also diversified. Now they sell music CDs, etc. also on the internet. eBay is a company which carries out auction transactions, auction and reverse auction. And a lot of people in North America sell their products to eBay. It is auction. And because it's difficult for an individual to do otherwise. So this is a very efficient mechanism for doing that. The Federal Express overnight delivery service in USA. The erstwhile night mail service in India. Now, anybody has knowledge about this night mail service in India? Of course, you were not born at that time when this service was there in India. You see, what happened was that the founder of this company, Federal Express, Frederick Smith, when he was studying in business business school, I think it was underground BBA. Now, in one of the courses where you have to write a paper on starting a new venture, you have to formulate a business plan. So he came up with an idea that he will set up a hub at Memphis, Tennessee, which was his hometown, and he'll have his overnight mail service. That means he'll collect mail from all over the country, have it transported by aircraft to this hub, and then again dispatched all over USA. So it will be done in less than 24 hours. Now, US Postal Service had a quick mail service where they charged marginally higher fees, but it used to take more time. They were delivering in 48 hours. Frederick Smith wanted to do it in less than 24 hours. But his professor was not impressed by his paper, so he got a very poor grade in that course. So he was disappointed, but he was very determined. And actually, after graduation, he set up his company. He bought a few small aircrafts, and he got into this business. And in the beginning, he was suffering losses. Most other people would have backed out, but he stuck on, like Narayan Murthy at Infosys. And then finally, it was successful. And finally, when success makes the whole world go round. Then the American Management Association actually gave him an award for that same paper where he had got a CA. It was regarded as a seminal paper. But at that time, some Indians protested. They said there's nothing new in this paper. It might have been plagiarized. The reason was that in India till 1969, we had an identical service. Nagpur was the hub. Indian Airlines aircrafts used to carry mail from the 4 metro cities and also from Hyderabad and Bangalore to Nagpur. And then early morning, next morning, it used to be delivered to all these cities. So it was only for these cities that Indian Postal Service didn't charge any extra fees. It was being operated very successfully. But then Indian Airlines said that it was not getting time to carry out some of the routine maintenance on these aircrafts. So it was discontinued in 1969. Now they are thinking of reintroducing it. So something which we are doing successfully, now we have stopped doing that. And Federal Express and United Parcel Service, these two companies, have the second highest and third highest number of aircrafts in the world. I think Federal Express has about 700 aircrafts. UPS must be having 650. The only company to have more aircrafts is American Airlines. They have about 750. And United Airlines must be having about 600. So that's the level of operations as far as Fed Express is concerned today. Now, if you look at some of these figures, in the USA, 11.2% of the gross domestic product is spent on this logistics cost. It's $1.2 trillion. In fact, it's more than our GDP. If you look at, third-party logistics service grew in 2004 by 12% to approximately $50 billion. In India, the figure is about, logistics spend is about 3 lakh crore rupees. It works out to about 12 to 13% of GDP. These are the various elements of cost. In grocery industry in USA, they spend $30 billion. It could save $30 billion by using effective logistics strategies. The data shows that a typical box of cereal spends 104 days getting from factory to supermarket. For Coca-Cola, so this I mentioned earlier, it takes about 9 months. Typical new car spends 15 days traveling from the factory to the dealership. This is in USA, where they have very well-designed highways. It should actually be transported in a matter of 3 or 4 days. Then in case of compact, also these figures are given. Boeing company, Boeing aircraft at one time, because of shortage of raw materials and components, it suffered, losses of billions of dollars because it couldn't make the aircrafts in time. In fact, it happened even to companies like IBM and Compaq. Then, as I was mentioning the example of NDTV, whenever they get to become the largest producer of milk, then the Dabawalas I mentioned. Then Procter & Gamble estimates that it saved retail customers $65 million through logistics gain over the past 18 months. This was in the 90s. Their computer has outperformed the competition in terms of shareholder value growth over the 8-year period by over 3,000%. That's the rate at which they have grown. Using the direct business model where they get orders from the corporate sector. That means they'll get orders for a few hundred pieces, let's say from General Motors or Boeing and so on. And then, initially Dell was only getting orders from the corporate sector, that was his policy. Then he was assembling it in his plant. And then later on he went for this build to order strategy where individuals place an order. Now earlier individuals used to place order by sending a fax message or by sending a letter where they laid down the configuration. Now you can get onto their website and you can go for the configuration. You will be given choices of what will be the size of the hard disk. Will it be 30 GB, 40 GB, 60 GB and so on. How much the RAM will be and so on. Because they are fine tuning. For instance, at one time what they did, when Windows XP was announced, they should have seen to it that if you go for Windows XP, you should have a minimum RAM of something like 256 or 512 megabytes, which they didn't do. So some people actually bought this PC with less RAM, then later on they have to put in an additional memory into their computer. So since it is either direct orders or this configuration, build to order, they don't really have inventory of finished products. In 10 years, Walmart transformed itself by changing its logistics system. It has the highest sales per square foot in their stores, highest inventory turnover and operating profit of any discount retailer. And it also has the highest customer service in terms of the product that the customer wants, whether it is available in this store or not. Now, complexities involving supply chain management. Supply chain is a complex network of facilities and organizations with different conflicting objectives. Matching supply and demand is a major challenge because it is very difficult to forecast demand. I mean, you can do it, but it may not be a precise forecast. So you have to sort of operate in such a manner that you are less and less dependent on forecasts. The system variations over time are also an important consideration. Many supply chain problems are new and there is no clear understanding of the issues involved. This is another example. Let's skip over this. Now, there are three types of integration that you have to carry out in the supply chain in today's world. One is the geographic integration because everything has become global. So you will have distribution or not only distribution but even manufacturing taking place all over the world. And some companies have really fine-tuned this entire system from the geographical integration point of view. For instance, Toyota has 3 plants in USA making LCVs and automobiles, but they are located either in the East Coast or in the middle, not in the western part of USA. So the cars, Toyota cars sold in California or Oregon state or western part of Canada are actually imported from Japan by ships. That is cheaper than transporting a car by tractor trailer from eastern USA to western USA. So that's the sort of optimization they have carried out in terms of the integration. Then functional integration from function-dominated logistics to flow-dominated logistics. Then you have this inter-firm integration from a firm-based logistics to inter-firm logistics. Now, supply chain integration again is difficult for different type facilities in the supply chain. They have different conflicting objectives. For instance, the suppliers are in direct conflict with the manufacturer's desire for flexibility. The supply chain is a dynamic system that evolves over time. What you design today may not be applicable a few years later. Indian Oil Corporation has set up a refinery at Barauni in North Bihar. It was getting oil from Assam, from the Digboy and Duliajan oil fields. They had laid a pipeline from Duliajan to Barauni. Over the years, the production in Assam went down. Another refinery was set up at the Numaligarh, and now Barauni doesn't get any crude oil from Assam. So it has to import from the Middle East. Then they have to set up a pipeline from Haldia to Barauni. Initially it was being transported by rail tank pipelines. So the entire logistics system had to be changed. So this is how you'll find that the supply chain system has to evolve over time because nothing remains constant. Then these are the various trade-offs. Key concepts: design, operate and control the physical and information flows as though the channel were one seamless corporate entity. Let the activities and costs migrate across corporate boundaries to where they make the most sense. So unlike Henry Ford, who said that you make everything, but if you look at Ford Motor Company of today, you will find that it has sold off all those units, steel plants, tire and tube making plants and so on. Now it has become much less vertically integrated. In fact, Ford India has placed orders for making engines and gearboxes to other companies. Henry Ford would have never dreamed of such a thing happening. And you'll find that there are companies, leading companies like, let's say, Microsoft, they could easily have made computers. But Bill Gates has always taken the stand that he will stick to just software development and operating systems, nothing else. He will not go into hardware manufacturing. Though Google has got into hardware manufacturing, they make some servers, apart from what they do for the search engine. Rely on the benefits of channel integration to replace the benefits of open market forces. Share the risks and rewards between players. This is very important in the supply chain. In the supply chain, you have strategy, you have planning, you have operation. Now, process view of cycle chain, you can either do it as a cycle or you can look at it from the point of view of push-pull and just explain what it is. You will find that when a customer comes and buys a product, he starts off this customer order cycle. So the retailer has to replenish his stocks by placing an order on the wholesaler or distributor. Distributor in turn gets it from the manufacturer, and manufacturer has to source his inputs from the suppliers. So these are the various cycles. This is one way of looking at a supply chain. And I'll just skip those. There is another view, push-pull view of supply chain. Pull process. Execution is initiated in response to a customer order. Now, Dell makes a product after the customer has placed the order. So that way, he actually reduces the inventory level of his product. Now, there are other companies doing it. If you look at National Bicycles company in Japan's subsidiary Matsushita, they actually make the premium end bicycles as per customer orders. So if a person goes there and asks for one of those sports cycles of National Bicycle, they measure the height of the person and the weight of the person, and they have some standard configuration. It's not like going to a tailor, but they have about 3 or 4 different alternatives. This information is transmitted to a factory, and the cycle is assembled accordingly. So you can have pull processes for certain products which are assembled. Now in the paint industry, this concept has been used. Are you familiar with that? If you look at decorative paints, if you look at Asian paints, Asian world, actually the color world. In India, the first company to go for this was Johnson and Nicholson. So for acrylic emulsion paint, what happens is that they don't maintain inventory of paint of different colors in their retail outlets. The factory produces only the base paint, which is a white color, and it is transported in large quantity to various retail outlets, and the blending is done there. Now there are 3 dyes which they use, so these dyes have to be mixed in different proportions, and this data is stored in a PC there at the retail outlet. And when a customer is shown their catalog, you can find hundreds of different colors, but the differences are not major, but the customer gets the impression that the product is being made according to his choice. Now this code number is fed into the computer, and then there is a device by which the appropriate mix of these different dyes are sort of dropped into that container which contains the white paint. And then there is a blending machine which is essentially a device for rotating this entire drum, and the blending is done. So the customer has to wait for 10 or 15 minutes, but he gets the color of his choice and has a very large variety of choice. But the reason why paint companies introduced such a device is that they were having tremendous problems in terms of inventory management. Asian Paints found that they were having stockouts of some colors because they didn't know what colors the customer would want. Previously, they used to have about 10 different colors. For some other colors, they had excessive inventory. Now that problem has been solved. They have reduced the inventory level drastically. The customer service level has improved. So, pull process is there for many industries. And the push process, the execution is initiated in anticipation of customer orders. So this is how it looks, that up to a certain stage you have a push process. Let's say procurement, manufacturing and replenishment. And then you have the customer order cycle where you have the pull process. Now if you go to a restaurant and you order an a la carte item, so you'll find that the cooking that is done there after that is the the customer order cycle pull process. But the restaurant has to keep an inventory of different food items. Because they cannot go to the market after the customer has placed the order. So that is a push process. So the supply chain design and three components which are important. In-source or outsourcing, the make-buy or vertical integration procedure. That is what components or surface you will take care of in-house and what you will get from outside. You will find that if you look at some successful companies, like Michael Dell, who was asked about this aspect, that why don't you make components? So he said that if there are already 5 companies in the market making a component successfully, he doesn't want to become the 6th one and compete with them. Instead, he will buy from them. Now, he may be paying a little bit of profit margin, which those companies are getting, but he'll still be better off because he would not have enjoyed the economies of scale which these other companies are making. So you'll find there are specialized companies, not only Intel but other companies which make the DVD drives and other components. So he's better off that way, and he has to make very little capital investment. And same is true for companies like Microsoft and others. And you'll find in the case of Apple, they were the leaders in smaller computers in the 80s. But now they have gone for iPod. But you'll find that this iPod is not a radically different product. It is actually a related diversification for them. So it is some sort of horizontal diversification. But see, they didn't have a high degree of vertical integration at any point of time. They are similar to Dell in the sense that they are buying most of the components from outside and assembling them. You see, unlike IBM or Compaq, which make all the components in-house. And then you have partner selection. You buy some suppliers and partners of the chain. Now, here you have to decide how long the relationship is. And it should be related to the third aspect, which is the contractual relationship. Whether it is arm's length, joint venture, long-term contracts, strategic alliance, equity participation, you have various alternatives. Now you'll find in government and public sector, there is a well-laid-down policy that it has to be an arm's length relationship. In public sector, you can place order for the requirement for 1 year at the most. Next year, they will be tendering all over again. So you have to have arm's length relationship with suppliers. Now, you can have joint ventures where you actually set up a unit to manufacture some product. Now, you see, General Motors has set up, let's say, Delphi, which you can call either a joint venture or, it's almost like a subsidiary. It's a matter of degree, how much equity participation you have. Now, the Japanese policy is to have some equity participation. Like Maruti has invested, let's say, in about part of the ownership of their suppliers, maybe to the tune of 5% or 10%. So it's not that they control the company, but both companies have a stake in each other. And then you can have long-term contracts. It's like NTPC getting into a long-term contract with Coal India supply of coal. So you find that in many industries where you are dependent on some basic inputs in large quantities, then you have to have long-term contract. For instance, POSCO, before it comes into India, it is insisting on a long-term lease for sourcing of iron ore in Odisha. Otherwise, they're not sure how they will get the iron ore. They will not likely import from Brazil when iron ore is available next door. So you have to have long-term contracts in many cases. Then you can have strategic alliances also. So to find in a supply chain, these issues have to be resolved, and in today's world it has become very important as to how it is done. Because it will affect your competitiveness either positively or negatively. Lessons in supply chain design. Know your location in the value chain. Now, unlike Henry Ford who got into everything, in today's world you have to have a very specific place in the supply chain. You'll find there are large number of successful automotive component manufacturers. In fact, India is doing very well in this sector. If you look at Bharat Forge or Micro and other companies. But they have selected the area that they will stick to. So it's not that they're going to manufacture automobiles, but a particular component or sub-assembly. So every company has to decide what its location will be in the value chain. And the example like Dell, it only assembles, it doesn't make components. Intel, it only makes microprocessors, nothing else. And microprocessors is only for the computer industry, not for spacecrafts or other things. Microsoft is sticking to software development. Apple, it was making computers earlier, but this iPod is not a major goes into the detail. I'll give a copy of this. I'm not going to the details of this. We want to discuss this. Now, one of the concepts that Dell has introduced is inventory velocity, how fast the inventory moves. This is the term coined by him. The two terms he has coined. One is virtual integration. He says that instead of having vertical integration, you have virtual integration, where you still have integration, but not necessarily by having ownership of that other entity. The other term he uses is inventory velocity, how fast the inventory moves. So here, in this case, customers have immediate access to the latest technology because there's no inventory of finished goods, there's no obsolescence. Suppliers get their products to market quickly. Cash is generated through negative cash cycle. In their case, working capital is virtually zero because when a customer places an order, along with the configuration, he has to make a payment through a credit card. And the product will be delivered to him a few days later. But this is a period of time when Dell has access to the payments which you have made. And that's how it results in the negative cash cycle. They don't maintain inventory of monitors or keyboards and things like that. They are shipped directly from the plant of the company making monitors to the customer. So they have tie-ups with Federal Express and UPS. So every day they give a list of the customers, whether it's a Sony monitor or Samsung or Philips, and it has to be delivered to which customer at which address. And the customer gets actually 2 or 3 cardboard boxes. One coming from the Dell factory, which is actually the case, the CPU. And there may be another box containing the monitor, the third one containing the keyboard. And so these companies will also get the payment from Dell after these products have been delivered. So they end up with virtually a negative cash cycle. The model efficiency drive market share gain, quality is improved with fewer touches. The supply chain objective maximize overall value generated, etc. So I'll go through this. Now the dynamics of the supply chain. Now you'll find here that there are these 4 curves. Now this is one of the biggest problems in the supply chain. This observation was made in the 1960s by J.W. Forrester, who was a professor of electrical engineering at MIT. So it is known as the Forrester effect. Now if you look at it, you will find that this customer demand, it is fairly flat. You know, there is a little bit of fluctuation, but not too much. If you look at the retailer order, which is pink, the fluctuation has increased. Then if you look at the distributor orders, it has increased further, the green one. And then finally the production plant at the factory, the red one, it has increased like that. Now Forrester collected data from all sectors in the US industry, all manufacturing industries, whether it was mining or automobiles, electronics. And he found out that the trend was the same. But he was not a mathematician, so he could not explain from this data as to what was happening. And subsequently also, many people tried, but this was empirical data. It was like, let's say people on Earth 5,000 years ago, they were observing the sun is rising in the west, it is setting in the east and setting in the west, and they couldn't explain this phenomenon. So for several decades, in fact, from 60s till 90s, this was not explained. But in the 70s, MIT came up with a game called beer game. I don't know how many of you have played that game. It has to do with sale of beer at the retail outlet level. The demand is kept fairly steady. First few weeks is 8x, then it increases to 16, it's kept constant. But if you play the game, and information is not shared across the entities, there are 4 entities, factory, distributor, wholesaler, and retailer, you will find the same phenomena taking place. We have played it for many years with PGP, with MDP participants. Every time we get this phenomenon. So there is something to it which people didn't know for a long time. This beer game, earlier it was played manually, now it is played on a computer, but you get the same results. Now the name has been changed. Instead of calling it Forrester effect, it's called a bullwhip effect, because it is easier to understand how a whip operates. When you take a whip and use it on a bull, you hold the whip on one end, and the other end of the whip moves a lot. So at your end, it's not moving. So nowadays, it is referred to as the bullwhip effect rather than the Forrester effect. But if you look at this too, this customer demand variation, small variation is being magnified into a very large variation in the production plan. Now this happens in all supply chains. Now how do you get over this problem? So first law of supply chain management and operation. Now I'm calling it a supply chain law because mathematically now it has been proved that this has to happen. It is like, if you look at the motion of planets, when Newton came up with the laws of gravitation, laws of motion, Kepler came up with his laws of planetary motion. Now you can prove mathematically how these orbits would be and so on. But earlier people didn't have that. Same thing has happened here. The demand, variability or volatility in the observed demand or orders gets amplified as one goes upstream in the supply chain. So this is a good way of effect. In other words, fluctuations in orders increases as the move of the supply chain from customers to retailers to wholesalers to distributors to manufacturers to suppliers. Now, can you really do away with this amplification? Is there a way out? And what are the factors or variables which determine this bullwhip effect? Now, there is a second law. Let me mention that, then I'll go into bullwhip effect. It says that clock speeds accelerate. That clock speed is a measure of product life cycle. And it says that it accelerates or product life cycles decrease as you head downstream in the supply chain, closer to the final customer. The faster the clock speed, the shorter the lane. Now, clock speed is a function of technology, the type of technology in that industry, customer bonus, system complexity. Now, example, if you look at, let's say, the PC industry. So you started from the company which is making the semiconductor equipment maker. So there are equipments which will make the semiconductor. So let's say Intel will use that microprocessor. Then you go to the chip maker, and then to the PC maker and the website developer. Now you'll find that the volume of orders for the equipment maker actually, that is where it gets amplified. If you start from websites, go upstream, the product life cycle actually decreases. When you design various websites, you will find that this design keeps on changing quite quickly. Same is true for PC, but not that extent. In case of personal computers, the life cycle is approximately 3 years. We have Pentium 4, which is like the 8th generation of PCs, and this has happened in 25 years. So it's approximately 3 years. And if you go to semiconductor equipment maker, this cycle may be more like 10 years. So here, actually, the clock speed increases as you go downstream. Now, this is a concept which has been evolved by Charles Fine in MIT, that for all products you'll find, if you look at components or sub-assemblies, this clock speed behaves in this manner. If you look at an automobile, for instance, you'll find its design keeps on changing. But the basic thing from which it is made, the steel is made from iron ore. Now, in case of iron ore, the life cycle is very long. Iron ore was being used 100 years ago for making steel. Today also it is being used. And but if you look at the end product, there you will find the model keeps on changing every few years. And this is true for all electronic products. You'll find there are certain basic components like resistors or capacitors which don't change so quickly. But if you look at the final product, it changes radically, though many of the components may be the same. So you'll find even in the PC, you see, if you change the, let's say, the microprocessor and a few other inputs, the entire capability changes. But many of the inputs may be the same. Then optical, in another industry, optical components to telecom equipment to handset platforms to new phone applications. Now, if you look at today's mobile phones, for instance, you'll find more features are being added. A lot of things are changing. But you'll find in a mobile phone also, more than 50% of the components actually are standard components, not which have been there for maybe 50 or 60 years. So their product life cycles are very long. But the microprocessor which is used and the software, that has very short life. And so you'll find that nowadays you also have this personal digital assistant, where you have all the features of a computer as well as a cell phone and maybe a computer and so on. So more and more of these products are evolving, but you will find that the final product is very radically different from what it was earlier. But many of the inputs upstream are not so. So you'll find that of course clock speed has to drive business strategy. Now Dell has done this very successfully. the policy of not having inventory of finished goods. They have taken care of the clock speed. That means for the computer, when new generation of computers comes in, they don't suffer. Now, it's a matter of how companies deal with this aspect. The pull whip effect distorts demand information within the supply chain by different stages have different estimates of what demand looks like. Because here you are not told a priori what the demand distribution is. You see, the retailer will look at the empirical data, how many units he has sold. On that basis, he makes an inference, as to what the mean and standard deviation of that probability distribution is. And then he will place the order on the next date, which may be the wholesaler of the distribution center. Now, example, Procter & Gamble had faced this problem with Pampers. Hewlett-Packard had faced this problem with printers in Europe in the 90s. They were selling different brands because in Europe, the power supply changes from country to country. The language, so the manual has to be printed in different languages. And they found out that there was a lot of problem as far as inventory management is concerned. And this was happening because of the pull whip effect. The same problem was being faced by a company called Barilla in Italy. They are the leaders in the manufacture of pasta. Now, pasta is something like bread or chapati. It's a standard staple food of Italians. And Barilla has about 70% of the market. Now, in their case, the problem arose because they had a very sort of ill-designed incentive scheme for their salesmen. So their salesmen used to sell to distribution centers, and their volume of sales were measured every quarter. So at the end of the quarter, this salesman would put pressure on the distribution center to place additional orders, so that the total amount which he will show he has sold would exceed a certain amount and he gets the incentive. But this was increasing the inventory at the distribution center and creating problems for Barilla because at times they had to produce very large quantities. Then finally, Barilla centered that something was wrong. So they looked at the retail data, they went to the retailers, and they found out that the demand was absolutely stable. The volume of sales were not fluctuating at all. But as they went upstream, this volatility was increasing considerably. Then they realized that it was not a properly oriented incentive scheme. So they did away with the incentive schemes, and the problem was solved. Initially, there was a lot of resistance from the salesmen. So they said that at the end of the year, depending on how much profit the corporation makes, they will be given some incentive, but not on the basis of sales in various quarters. So these are the negative effects of this pull whip effect. Now the mathematics has been worked out. It was worked out by a very bright graduate student in the 90s. What happens? I'll just go quickly through this and I'll show you the final formula. If it is two entities, then the variance of Q, that is at the, let's say, first unit, let's say the manufacturer, and the variance D is the variance of the demand at the retailer. Then this is the formula where L is the lead time, P is the sample size. Now what this formula tells us is that if you can reduce the lead time, then this the volatility, the amplification will decrease. Higher the lead time, the more is the amplification. So there are two ways of reducing this variability. One is you reduce the lead time, and the other is that you take a larger sample size to get more precise estimates of your probability distribution. Now this is in the case where, of course, we have to also make an assumption that the information is being shared or not. Now if you go to more than two entities, let's say if you have multiple entities, then I'll just show you the formula. Here what happens is, this is a centralized demand information. That means every entity knows where the demand is. That means if a transaction takes place at the retail level, the entities upstream, the manufacturers and the suppliers will also know what this demand is. Then this is the formula. So you'll find that essentially what is happening is that this amount, Li, now it's becoming the summation of all the lead times across all these entities. And then the second term, of course, it is squared, the third term actually. So the higher the lead time, the more is the amplification. So one of the ways of reducing this effect is to reduce the lead time. So it has been observed that in systems where the lead times are short, the volatility doesn't increase that much. Now, but here, actually, information is being shared. It is something like what Walmart does. At the end of the day, they analyze all the data and they pass on the information to their suppliers as to what the volume of sales have been. But if this information cannot be shared, let's say you don't have the system to do that, then the formula changes. Instead of addition, now it's a product term. So what happens here, the amplification and volatility is much more. That means if the information cannot be shared across entities, then this will increase much more. In fact, in the case of the ordnance factory, we found out that there is a very strange policy that the Ministry of Defense will place an order on the headquarters, where the order will come, headquarters is at Calcutta. Then they in turn will tell the factory which makes the final product what the order is. Let's say so many vehicles or so many guns and so on. And then this factory will in turn, when they find that some input is required, they place the order on another factory. So they are actually operating with a decentralized demand information. So we have to tell them that you better share this information. As soon as you come to know from the ministry in Delhi that what you have to produce, then you transmit this information to every factory which is involved in making that product. That means they are making various inputs. Well, if you look at, let's say, any ammunition, the assembly process takes place at the last entity. But let's say one factory may be producing the chemicals, another factory may actually produce the container where it is to be put, and then the shell. In case of Bofors gun, in fact, the special kind of steel which is produced at Kasipur factory in Calcutta. So it goes to various factories. So it is better if you share the information immediately. So here it tells us that if it is decentralized demand information which is not being shared, then the amplification is much more. And therefore, supply chain systems should actually design a system where this information can be shared quickly. Now, if you have electronic data interchange between two companies, this is what Procter & Gamble has done with Walmart and other companies, then the other company gets information even on a transaction basis. They know exactly what volume of the product has been sold. Although that much detail is not required. This is a graph on the x-axis, you have the speed. The y-axis is ratio. This number show you it can be 20 or 25. So this variability can increase by tremendous amounts as you go upstream. Now, it exists in part due to the retailers need to estimate the mean and variance of demand. The increase in variability is an increasing function of the lead time. The more complicated the demand models and the forecasting techniques, the greater the increase. Then centralized demand information can reduce the bullet effect, but will not eliminate it. And then what are the causes? So sometimes the causes are artificial, it is created by management. First, if you announce discount sales, so in certain seasons you reduce the price. Then what happens, the demand goes up, and that leads to this increased variability in demand. So companies like Walmart have announced that they will have what is known as everyday low price. The same price will be maintained throughout the year to reduce this variability. Then this industry clock speed, as I was mentioning earlier, mobile phone industry clock speed depends on mobile phone, the mobile phone production process. So it depends on three things: the product, the process, and the organizational aspect. So for instance, if you look at transmission standards, operating system, you'll find that in some cases, if you look at the final handset, the clock speed is fast because you'll find that there are many people who change their mobile phones every year or once in 2 years. So it is fast clock speed. Services also is fast, but if you go upstream, the transmission standards, operating system, then it's slow. So this is how it happens. And now there's another problem in supply chain that you get the challenge is achieving global optimization, where you have conflicting objectives. And then you have this problem of managing uncertainty, matching supply and demand. Demand is not the only source of uncertainty. I'll take another 5 minutes and then I'll close my talk. Now, managing uncertainty, point forecasts are invariably wrong. So you have to go for aggregate forecast. Now, if you have aggregate forecast, you have what is known as the risk pooling effect. Now, you have studied statistics and you know that if you look at the variance of a sum of random variables, then it gets added linearly. It's the summation term. Means also get added up. But if you look at the coefficient of variation, it's the ratio of standard deviation to mean. So standard deviation actually decreases by a square root factor. Well, if you have n random variables, each one with a variance of sigma square, so the variance of this resultant random variable, which is the sum of the random variables, n sigma square. If you take the root, it is square root of n times sigma, and then you divide by mu. So you will find that coefficient of variation, which is a measure of the variability, decreases. So one of the ways to reduce the Bulliet effect is to actually reduce the variability by looking at the aggregate forecast, the forecast for the aggregate demand rather than one demand. So when we are talking about the paint industry, let's say you look at the demand for base paint, then you are looking at the aggregate demand, and therefore the variability is less. Now, this is what all asset management companies do when they invest in financial instruments, shares, bonds, etc. That if they invest in shares of different companies, each one has this risk reward profile, and the risk is measured by coefficient of variation. Now, you can decrease that by actually going for the aggregate amount. And this can be done by this postponement. When you do this thing in the supply chain, in the paint case, the last stage, then you are postponing one of the processes of imparting color to that paint. And this is also referred to as risk pulling. The technical term for this is delayed differentiation. That means you are differentiating the product at a later stage. And long-term forecast. So here you have all this. The other way of taking care of it is having two kinds of suppliers. Some suppliers who have low cost but high lead time, and the other category of suppliers will be having high cost but low lead time. Now, Indian textile manufacturers have low cost but high lead time. So many of the importers from North America and Europe, what they do, they place the orders from Indian textile manufacturers for the steady part of their demand, about which they are sure that it will materialize. And they give long lead time. And then there are garment manufacturers in Italy who will charge a much higher price, but they can deliver the product in much less time. So they combine these two things. And this, of course, curve I was mentioning earlier, that if you look at the responsiveness versus cost, so if you go for low cost, you have low response. If you have high cost, you have high responsiveness, because it's tied to how the suppliers will perform. And this is where you have to have this strategic fit. And you'll find that there's a concept of efficient supply chain and a responsive supply chain. Now, if you look at, let's say, the type of system that NTPC has in whole India, it's an efficient supply chain. It's supposed to achieve this logistics at a low cost. But then there are supply chains which have to have very low lead times, but they are willing to incur the cost. For instance, India exports a lot of flowers. This is floriculture. And there are two major centers from where this export takes place, Delhi and Bangalore. And the way this floriculture industry works is that in Europe, there is an auction center at Amsterdam. And the rule of the game is that from the time that you pluck the flower from the tree, most of the exports from India are roses. They have to arrive in Amsterdam within 48 hours, because the auction takes one more day. Then it has to be transported to various countries in Europe, which takes another 1 or 2 days. And the customer has to get the flower within 1 week from the time when it is plucked. So what this industry does, the people who produce these flowers, the roses, they have actually chartered KLM Boeing 747 aircraft. These are very large aircraft which can carry more than 400 passengers, carrying only flowers. I think they have about 3 flights from Delhi in a week and 2 from Bangalore. So huge amounts of flower are taken. So these aircrafts take off from Delhi, I think within something like 20 hours or maybe 12 hours after the flower is plucked from the plant. And the flight time is 8 hours. So it does arrive in Amsterdam within 48 hours, the stipulated period. They are very strict about this aspect. I mean, they will not put up with any deficiency in quality. And they are sold at a very high price. It's about $1 euro at the retail level. So about 55 or 60 rupees for 1 rose. But this industry, it goes for that type of supply chain. You'll find in some cities, I don't know whether it is here, Pizza Hut and they deliver pizza to your home. The rule is that if you place an order on them, somebody comes in a scooter, and they have a specially designed tiffin box and everything. They promise a delivery time of about half an hour. Now, there is an increased cost because of this type of delivery, but it's a responsive supply chain. Now, customers are willing to pay a higher price for that. So you find that in every industry you have to decide whether it is going to be an efficient supply chain or it has to be a responsive supply chain. So it will depend on the nature of the product and what the customer wants. Dealing with multiple owners. Then there is fragmentation of markets and product variety. So you'll find that another reason why you need different types of supply chain are all these factors. Data logistics. Then you have this e-commerce. This is also a major aspect of the supply chains. E-business in the retail industry. So if you go for e-supply chain, you will find that you move from a push-pull chain because the company like Amazon responds to actual orders from customers and so on. So these factors are there. Then Walmart's. Now the new concepts in supply chain, we have already discussed about push-pull strategy and postponement. I was discussing about there and so on. Now there is another very important aspect of supply chain which has to do with supply contracts. The type of contract that you have with suppliers. Now this is an example of postponement. You can go through it. If you combine two products, Benetton has done this for garments. They impart the color at a later stage. So this is an example of t-shirts with two different colors. Right now what has happened because of World Cup, a lot of t-shirts have been made with colors for Brazil, Argentina, Germany and England, and none of them reached the semi-finals. So if you could have a standard t-shirt, which you convert later, now you need for other countries actually, for Italy and France and so on, then you find that this postponement works very well. So many of these retail outlets are stocked, the last cost, and Brazil is written there, Brazil and Argentina. So Benetton had actually developed this process. They spent a lot of money. This is the arithmetic that is given, you can read it later. Now what Benetton did, I'll show you how they have changed the process. The usual process for making garments, you spin or purchase yarn, dye the yarn. So the dyeing of color is done at the yarn stage. Then you finish the yarn and you manufacture the garment. That means finishing yarn means you make the fabric. And you make the garment parts, line parts. But what they did, for certain types of garments, this step is postponed, dyeing the garment. That means at the yarn stage you are not imparting color, it is white. The only limitation to this is that you cannot have multiple colors in that garment. They have developed a technology where it is for one color, but it can be done in the retail outlet. The cost of processing goes up a little bit, but they save much more in terms of reducing the inventory carrying cost. So this is what they have done. Benetton postponement and push-pull boundary. This we have discussed. That you have this push-pull for all industries. And in fact, Barnes and Global have also gone in for the system of imagine selling on the internet. Now you will find that every industry has to identify what the push-pull boundary will be. That is, up to what point of time they will, do according to forecasts of plans, and from where they will respond to customers. Like in case of Dell, the push-pull stage is at the assembly line. And in the automobile industry, only in case of Cadillacs made by General Motors, they have put up some distribution centers. So the push-pull stage is at that stage, not at the retailer stage. Then in case of traditional retailers, you will find that it is at the retail outlet itself, in the store. Now, in the push stage, you will find that the level of uncertainty is low, but long lead times, cost minimization. And at the other end, it's high uncertainty, and you need short cycle time and so on. Now, this is the last theme I think of, supply contracts. Now, you find that there are different entities, and there are different companies often interact with each other. So the way you interact is through contracts. So you have agreements which should be legally binding in a court of law, sometimes in one country, maybe across other countries also. So you have these supply contracts, managerial levers to improve supply chain profitability. Supply chain contracts and their impact on profitability. How can contracts be structured to increase supply chain profitability, setting optimal levels of product availability in practice? Now, most contracts are in the nature of wholesale contracts, in which buyer and seller make decisions independently. Like, I was giving the example of newspaper. This is true for all products. You'll find different types of problems arising. Most of them have to do with demand uncertainty. But along with demand uncertainty, if you have short life cycle, that aggravates the problem. So if you look at food products like bread or cake, they have limited life, maybe 2 or 3 days. Instead of the newspaper, which is maybe a few hours, and a magazine maybe a few days. And along with that, you have a certain level of uncertainty in the demand. And therefore, you have to have contracts which will ease or facilitate or let's say improve the profitability of both the entities in the supply chain. Now, wholesale contracts, the way it operates is that there is a fixed price at which the product or service is sold to the next stage. And therefore, the risk is borne entirely by the retailer. Let's say in a typical retail outlet, they buy the various products from upstream. And then from that point of time, it is his responsibility to sell the product. Now, in case of pharmaceutical industry, of course, most manufacturers take back the medicines which don't get sold on time. You get over this problem. But usually they put a limit on how much they will take back. Maybe 5% of the sales volume and so on. So wholesale contracts don't lead to risk sharing, but this is a very popular type of contract. To make the retail order more and increase the company's profit, the supplier has to take on part of the risk. So how do you do it? So risk sharing mechanisms include buyback contracts. So you have a returns policy. That means the manufacturer will buy back some of this product, but at a lower price than what it was sold. Now there are mathematical models which will tell you at exactly what price this should be taken back so that the total profit of the supply chain is maximized. Here, the profit of the supply chain is defined as the profit of the various entities in the supply chain. Let's say the retailer and the manufacturer, and if you have other entities, their case also. Then you can have revenue sharing contracts. Now, wherever there is a lot of risk, you have to have revenue sharing contracts. Otherwise, people will not buy certain types of goods or services. Example is of the entertainment industry. You will find that large number of movies are produced. Many of them turn out to be flops. But the producers have invested a lot of money. So, and then there are distributors who purchase the rights in certain parts of the country or the world. So let's say there may be 10 different distributors who are buying these rights from the producer. The distributors in turn are getting this film screened in various movie halls. Now, if let's say the movie theater owner has an apprehension that a particular movie will not do well, he will not screen the movie if it is a fixed contract that he has to pay fixed sum to the distributor. So how do you get over that? This has happened to the other entertainment sectors like CDs containing movies or CDs containing music. They are rented out in many cases. So how do you do it? So what they do is that there is a revenue sharing contract where there may not be any fixed revenue for, let's say, the distributor who rents the movie, but he may get a certain percentage of the proceeds of the movie theater. It may be 40% or 60%, depending on what the movie is. In most cases, this contract is in the form of a fixed component and a variable component. So usually, the product or the service is sold at much lower than the cost price. So this distributor will not recover the entire cost by just renting it out. But depending on the volume of the business, he will get a certain amount of profit. In some cases, he may have a loss, but the loss will be shared with this movie theater owner. So in many industries, you have this revenue sharing type of contract where the risk is shared between the two partners. And again, these mathematical models are there which will tell you what should be the optimum share of this two entities. That is the movie theater owner and the distributor. And then there are option contracts where actually if you pay a certain amount in advance, these are called real options. Then you have the option of placing an order for that quantity at a later point of time. But there is no commitment that you have to buy the entire amount. So you get more time to observe the demand, then decide exactly how many units to buy. So these option contracts give a certain amount of flexibility to the this retailer, or he also knows, he gets an opportunity to observe the demand for part of the season. Let's say it's winter garments. Now he may like to wait till the month of November or December to see how the demand is materializing. So initially he may, let's say, make an option contracts for 1,000 units where he pays a small amount, upfront payment. Then if he doesn't buy anything, he loses that amount. But when he buys, he gets it at a reasonable price later on. So he has this option contracts. And again, here also there are mathematical models which are available to take the optimum decision. Then there are quantity flexibility where you don't have to make a commitment for an exact quantity when you are placing an order on the supply. You have some flexibility that at a later point of time you will hit the exact amount. Now this is followed in all public sector purchases. That when in the tendering process, if they mention 1,000 units, then usually there is a variation clause that the supplier has to agree to 20% or 25%, either more or less than that quantity. So that quantity flexibility is built in. And at the time when the order is placed, by that time, the manufacturer has a better estimate of what his actual requirement would be, and he places the order accordingly. And certain amount of flexibility is usually built in for the supplier also. So these are various mechanisms for risk sharing, and they actually increase the profit made by the two entities. Because if you don't share risk, actually the total profit goes down. The earlier framework was that people didn't want to share risk. Now they have to realize that it's counterproductive. So this is one of the major advances which have been made in supply chain in recent years. That more and more contracts are becoming risk sharing. In fact, if you look at the legal system in Europe and North America, most lawyers now take up cases on this basis. They don't charge fixed fees. They'll, let's say, have a certain amount which is fixed to meet their basic costs. But after that, in most cases where they sue some person, they will ask for as much as 25% or 40% of the amount they get. But that's if they win the case. And most clients are willing to pay a very high percentage of the proceeds. Because if they know if they win the case, it's all right. If the lawyer takes a lot of money. So that's how it works. The last development in supply chains has been dynamic pricing, as I mentioned earlier, which has to do with optimum allocation of capacity in service industry. So in hotels and airlines have done it. Now the railways have gone in for that. You find in railways what they're saying is that, let's say if you are traveling by 2-tier AC and there is a seat empty in first class AC, then you may be upgraded to that. Now, are they doing charity by this? And the answer is no. They're actually increasing the revenue, because what they will do, you see, a person may find it very costly to travel by first class AC, so it is going empty. In fact, most people who travel by first class AC get passes from the railways or they're paid by their organization. Now, when this 2-tier passenger goes to first class AC, his berth becomes vacant. Now, there's another person, there's more demand for this 2-tier AC. So, some person will book that ticket, so the revenue of the railway increases. Or it may happen that they will upgrade a 3-tier passenger to the 2-tier, and then somebody buys that 3-tier ticket. So, you'll find that utilization increases. So, you'll find that airlines buy tickets at they sell tickets at a lower price. Of course, they have to ensure one thing in this dynamic pricing, that people who are in a position to pay higher price, they should not pay lower price. If that happens, then they lose the game. So the way they do it is they do some forecasting of demand. That how many persons are willing to pay the full price and how many persons are not, they don't have the purchasing power to pay the full price. So you find in all airlines only a small fraction of the seats are sold at a discount. Most of them are actually sold at the full price, depending on what the demand pattern is. They do upgradation also. You'll find that particularly people who have this frequent flyer card, you know, they get this upgradation, upgrading pass, you know. So I got several times from the airlines. So if a seat is empty in the executive class, then only you are upgraded. So the airlines doesn't lose out. But that seat, when it becomes empty, they can sell it to another passenger. Now, this is a concept which is based on common sense, but you will find that for a long time it was not being utilized. Though in some industries it was being done. Let's say, if you look at most movie theaters in India, you will find that in the cinema halls you have different slabs of tickets. Now in INOX, it only depends on the time of the day. If you go in the morning show, the fares are low, and in the evening it is more. So again, they are shaping demand. What they are saying is that, see, most people are not in a position, if they are working or if they are students, to go in the morning show, but they are getting an incentive because there are empty seats in the morning show. So if you go in the morning show, we'll sell you at a lower price. This is again dynamic pricing. The other thing that cinema halls do, they may have 4 or 5 different classes of customers, high fares, low fares, and so on. And that way, they are actually maximizing the revenue. And so you'll find that there's always this factor of demand price elasticity. So if you charge low price, there's higher demand. So you can always fill up the seats. But you don't want to lose out on revenue. So again, mathematical models are available. So the major advance that has taken place in recent years in this field of supply chain has been that a lot of mathematics has been worked out to arrive at optimum models for these cases. Dynamic pricing, the supply contracts, and so on. And most companies are actually following those models to get better results. In fact, in airlines, it's a matter of survival. Since the time when American Airlines introduced this, now you'll find all airlines are following this. These are called revenue management or yield models. You know, I think I have put that name there somewhere. Should be somewhere.